Turn it over to you to open up for questions.
Yes, hi, Deanna Graham from Walters Kluwer. That was terrific. Thank you very much. This isn't really my world, so it's very interesting to hear. I'd also like to apologize if the question that I ask is incredibly naive and all of you, think I should know the answer to it. But what I'm hearing is we need an individual impact factor of some sort. I'm wondering, you're all sort of taking different approaches to this.
People use, the H-index. We used at Harvard, we tended to look at just total citation counts on a given set of papers. And I actually think, yes, I think ultimately if we succeed at this, it is going to lead to some sort of enhancement of an individual, impact indicator of some sort. But I think really what all of us were talking about was more that qualitative information. We're really talking about, wanting to identify the right expert for reviewing something or for collaborating with, wanting to understand what someone's unique contribution was. So that, they're really the two sides of it in my mind, and I see the qualitative information and being able to track that qualitative information as taking precedence for our needs. But
one thing that I would just add is I think it's the distinction isn't so much not that it's an individual impact factor, but that there's a valence to it, that that researchers can modulate between different roles that they play and may have more impact playing some of those roles than others. And so being able to start to get to that, particularly in the various contexts where you're looking to, there's sort of a discovery context where you're trying to find people for various reasons, and then there's a sort of evaluation context. Underlying this, there is a current of, in the evaluation context especially, trying to value certain kinds of roles that may not have been well valued or as clearly valued, right. Or at least distinguishing between them in order to make smarter evaluation decisions. But I think it's really that valence that's the important piece, that it's not just sort of, that if we do this, then we can have a better sort of single metric that sums up everything, with being able to understand that nuance.
Just to follow up, so where does that link up to the impact factor of the journal? If you're looking at something, you talk something more universal that's more qualitative and quantitative, and so is there any thought given to sort of how the sort of the journal contribution or whatever other contribution would filter into that?
I don't see those as related, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think, especially, I think the impact factor of journals has been misused quite a lot, especially, and it's very, the slippery slope starts when you go away from the journal. I think it's an interesting measure. If you look at a journal as a whole, if you start looking at an individual article, the impact factor fails. It's not representative of the value of an individual article, let alone an individual person. And I think that going back to that, these are two very different things. And I would agree with Josh about the importance of the qualitative thing.
I guess I think about it as there are a number of interconnecting pieces, and of course, and even if you knew all of the ways that an individual contributed to a project or particular set of outputs from that project, articles, data sets, etc., you'd still want to know how important that project was in different contexts, how important that output, who used it, for what purposes. So it's not measuring the same thing, but it fits into the decision process and the sort of decisions that I think about when I wear my administrator hat is, who do I want to bring into our department team? How is that going to affect the productivity? Or from a scientific point of view, if I'm doing my hypothesis testing, what if we took that biostatistician and moved them from here to here? Would that change the productivity of the group? Does it matter who fills that role. And so that's, so they're very specific decision problems that qualitatively or quantitatively these things might inform.
Yes, I'm Mike Freeman from the American Meteorological Society. It seems to me that the biggest challenge here is to get some sort of consensus that these are the major roles that co-authors are playing in whatever publication are there. And I'm just wondering how optimistic you are, given the wide variety of disciplines, obviously, that this is applicable to. How optimistic are you that there will be a consensus, or is it really discipline by discipline because they are so different? And what do you do with the interdisciplinary kind of articles?
Right. I mean, yeah, I'm pretty optimistic based on those study results that we can establish a consensus baseline vocabulary for the sciences, not all fields of study in the world, but I think that it's not going to have the level of detail that Veronique was talking about that you see in contribution statements about using a particular reagent or doing a particular type of experiment, and that might argue that you'd want to give publishers the option to collect both and use both. But I think that it's going to take some work and getting input from a broader range of fields than we did, but I think that we actually will get there. But I don't think it will be something that will just be this is never going to change, right? I mean, I think it's going to be something that has to have some dynamic quality to it as science changes and roles change. But if we're not, if we stay at a relatively general level and a relatively small number of roles, I think we can do a pretty good job.
Yeah, yeah, I think we discussed a lot about that, because that was really the tension. Is like when are you general and make things usable, because that's the thing. It has to be easy to use, and the minute you're trying to really be much more specific, you make it unwieldy and really difficult. So I think that I think that ultimately what we're going to end up with is probably a combination of sort of an infrastructure that is given by a very broad framework provided by a taxonomy, which allows to differentiate between broad roles, and then something which is much more open text field or more specific, depending on where we want to go, which is much more providing the granularity and that people might be inclined to use for credit. So I think if you use the credit as an incentive for people to use this kind of thing, I think we can reach a good balance.
Just to add to that, and we'll move to your question. I think also that one way of looking at there's a separation of concerns that you can take, that this taxonomy focuses on the particular sorts of actions people were taking. And another dimension of this, which was starting to be in the qualitative, was what was the balance within that particular area? Well, you contributed to writing, 3 people contributed to writing. What was the balance of that? And another is the portion of the work. If it's a data set or software, it could be the version or the sub-piece. And so by distinguishing some of these characteristics, we can at least make some statements that fall in generalizable categories. And we started by looking at a number of different sources, including science journals and medical journals and computer science, and the objective of some of the standardization work is to test that against a wider community, seek wider impact. Again, not across all fields, we're not going to humanities, but to seek a sort of wider set of input to make sure that this hypothesis is right at the outline level.
Could I actually just add one quick thing? Just one other point on this. It strikes me that to the point about how do you know if you've got the right set of categories, it's the real test of success is going to be whether this isn't just pushed down from on high, sort of from various institutional players, but those categories have got to actually do productive work for the various people who are identifying with them. If saying if say data curation, if that isn't a role on a team that somebody wants to actually say, I did that, and get value from that as opposed to just being a name in an undifferentiated list, then, you know, arguably you don't necessarily have the right categories, or it's not worth this effort. I think, you know, we all talked a lot about the different perspectives from which you can, different institutional perspectives from which this can be valuable, but in the end, it really has to, you know, work and provide value to researchers. Otherwise, you know, it's not worth moving from a sort of undifferentiated list of names.
And in dog fooding this, I've been working on several papers with 8 different people from 3 different disciplines, and we were having these discussions last month, and I said, let's use this. And when I wrote a description, people said, yeah, that's fine. So we're trying it out and seeing if it can be useful to us. Yeah.
My question is it valuable, what's the transparency of this categorization of contributions? Is it transparent to the reader and the user of the article? Is it mainly for the back end, sort of post-publication evaluation? Do you imagine every name you click through and you find out what their role was? I mean, and then what do you think the effects would be? Will it reduce the number of authors? Is that a goal, or will it just clarify why they're all there?
I can respond to this.
So I think in terms of how it's going to appeal, that it's probably going to be up to publishers and to decide whether they want to make transparent. I mean, we have taken the stand that we make that transparent and publish it in the paper. A lot of other publishers capture some form of contribution statements and don't publish them. I don't think, I think if we want to make it useful for evaluation and all that, we do want to have it at the metadata level, at a minimum. How people are going to apply it further, I think there's possibly multiple views on implementation there. And as far as, go ahead.
No, but your other question, and we, never in our discussions did we talk about the fact that it might reduce the number of authors. In fact, in fact, it was more along the lines of there are roles that people play, they tend to be more junior contributors that don't get called out, that are more likely to get called out. So, yeah.
I just have a question. What do you envision, if any, the implications of more detailed or standardized contribution lists having on misconduct investigations
At the institution.
Yeah. That's interesting. I can think of cases of misconduct. The Mark Hauser case was just surfaced in the paper again today because the report came out of the university and the federal office finally. And, you can imagine, and some of those papers were collaborative. When people are, very decisively affiliated with a particular role, then you know that those individuals are more accountable. And I think it actually would be helpful in misconduct cases within institutions. I think that is one of the uses of it.
Yeah, if I can, there is one thing which is a bit more of a philosophical view on things, which we probably need to be a bit careful about with these detailed contributions statements, is that you do not want to move away from co-authors sharing responsibility in a paper. I think that's sort of been the ethos in the publishing community, that until perhaps 10 years ago, it was like, well, if your name is on the paper, you're responsible for everything in that paper, and you carry that responsibility, and you better work with your co-authors in such a way that you can bear that responsibility. I think with the type of collaborative work that we see now, this is unrealistic. There's so many different expertises and such broad level of collaborations that you can't always be accountable for everything. But I think we shouldn't go to the point where you lose the accountability for more than your little bit on the paper. I think that's an interesting dilemma there. But and even from an editor's perspective, when we have these authors' contribution statements and there is an allegation, you can't tell, well, I wasn't part of these experiments if that's what you wrote in the paper. You can't tell, I didn't know it was the postdoc if you wrote that you supervised the work. And so these kind of things are important in both ways. And credits goes with accountability.
But I think actually that really is the main point. If you're forced to be transparent in saying what you did, you're probably less likely to, to abuse the system. So,
I would agree with that from the policy point of view, and I'd also say from sort of a collaboration point of view, knowing that you're going to make these things causes you to think about talking about them earlier. And talking about the roles and responsibilities leads to less mistakes in the beginning. So there are two drivers. One is the transparency, and the second is the anticipation of this creates hopefully earlier discussion.
Having spent most of my first 20 years actually in a research setting, I realized I'm a co-author of 4 papers in 20 years. Most of the time there really wasn't any discussion with me of whether I would or would not be a co-author. The first time that I realized that I was going to be a co-author on this was when I got a pen and preprint. I didn't even know it submitted. But I could see there being this providing a real push toward increasing the number of co-authors because this had been something that was discussed among the people in the laboratory at that time. I would say, wait a minute, I'm the person primarily responsible for this and this and this for the team. And, can you include me in this discussion?
So I know the discussions are really focused on these journals and
Could you speak up?
the topic of STM journals and evaluation. I'm coming from a university press humanities background, and issues of authorship and contributor roles definitely comes up, especially as we go into more digital humanities projects, people from different sectors. And I'm curious, based on the projects you're currently working on and the work you've done, what are your aspirations for how they influence the culture of authorship with books?
I would expect that if we're successful at this, that it would be very influential. In fact, when I was still working on this at Harvard, I had a discussion with a professor in history, a guy named Vince Brown, who is involved in digital humanities at Harvard, who said, this is exactly what we need, right? And the fact that you're developing this is going to be great because then humanists and social scientists can pick up on this work as well. We decided in scoping this project that we weren't going to try to do everything, so we're not at this stage getting input from humanities, but I do think it will have an impact there as well. And I had similar discussions with other people. Yeah.
I would actually just add, having spent a number of years in the sort of digital humanities world, that that what I find really interesting about that context is that even though and in some ways one of the most intriguing things on the slides is the uptick in number of authors on arts and humanities work as well, which is a not trivial increase, though by no means what's going on in say physics. But in some ways I feel like the digital humanities moment in part is about wrestling with what team authorship means in fields where there was a very traditional model of a lone scholar, and so it's different than say in the sciences where there's certain sciences where there's a tradition of a long list of undifferentiated names. There's a long tradition of a single name, and unpacking that not unlike the previous comment, surfaces a lot of these discussions that are happening right now.
So, I have a question for the audience. In your experience, what's the biggest point of friction in dealing with multiple authors? And where, if anywhere, could this be useful, and how might you start to adapt it? If so, what would it take to go from some abstract taxonomy to something that could be really used to address some of the problems that you see? Exactly, and what the pain points or frustrations with multiple authors you most frequently encounter, and the difference, what needs to happen to implement any change, even if you decide it's useful.
My name is Kathy Baskin. I'm from the Neurology Journals. And we had found that we were having problems with guest authors and ghost authors a few years ago. And so we decided to make all our authors and other contributors state what they do when they submit their papers to us. We have them, each of them state what they actually do, whether they're authors or contributors. We print it all out, we publish it online and in the journal, in print. And we feel like we've gotten some really good, in just talking with our authors, we're planning to do a survey, and just talking with our authors before and after, we think that there are a lot of authors who are not appearing anymore because that were, department chairs and that sort of thing, I think is a big thing. And also, we are asking medical writers to be identified, and if they have drafted the first draft of the manuscript, or if they've substantively revised the manuscript, for instance, answer the reviewers' comments, we ask them to be on the byline. We got a little flack from that at first, but as our authors have gotten used to that process, and we are really publishing everything people do, it's clearly transparent that those people are medical writers, and we're finding that there's an acceptance of just our bringing out, just making everything transparent, what everyone does.
And what about, and how does that integrate with how you handle order of names?
We do not, with the author byline, we do not mess with that. We figure that is the author's job to set the order in the byline, just as long as they tell us what everybody did, and we can publish that. It's up to them how they want to order. So we're not trying to do an ordering system now. It'll be interesting to see how your project turns out, and we may consider that. But I don't think our experience in talking to authors before we did this, before we went into this process, was that authors really want to say themselves where they belong in author guidelines, and I think in our discipline, there's just a certain traditional order that people want to be in. The writer, the name, the person who wrote it, and probably a postdoc a lot of times, or a fellow who did most of the writing and research is first author. Whoever's last was is the last author, and people are grouped in between according to the time they spent or the value that those authors perceive that they put in. They have to agree to the authorship. We don't perceive with the manuscript that there's any authorship dispute as far as the order. Our authors, what they told us was that, they are the authors. They don't really want us to mess with who their author group is, and they don't mind telling us what each of them did, as long as we don't get into their business.
Right. And you're also saying, and I think this is true in medical publishing in general, that it's each individual sort of self-declaring as opposed to one individual, one lead person assigning the roles. Right.
That's right. We actually have them all fill out an online form that asks for, we actually list all sorts of contributions that people could be making. They have to fill in a field indicating something, that they, whatever they've done as far as, whatever their role was. If there is something else that we've missed in that list, I think we have like 11 or 15 possibilities, then we give them a blank field and tell them what else they did. And that's what we publish.
Thank you.
there other people using contributor statements of any sort? Or is the-
It's currently not mandatory, but we, interestingly, we've noted.
Stuck over there in the corner.
Not taking the number of authors that are doing it, not by any prompting of our own, but we do our submission form, we require all authors, and we also submit all authors receive a copy of this submission notification, and all authors receive a copy of the decision letter, so there's even a note into the submission letter saying that, you're copied on this. We're not aware that you were an author on this development, and we're all office, and we've had that happen a couple of times. And, we get requests to change author order, add an author, remove an author. We get that occasionally after acceptance, and require all authors to sign off on it. One recently in which we sent that information to all authors to sign off, and we haven't heard back for a while. We received a letter from the institution saying that first author didn't agree with the institution, performed an investigation, and recommended that other author needed to be added. It happens, but we don't get involved. It's up to the institution to rectify options.
Other questions for the audience?
So,
Well, we'll give ourselves 5 minutes off for good behavior. Unless there are, if other people with questions can feel free to come up to the front and interrogate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is that thunder that you're hearing? Is that, I'm hearing, is it thunder? I'm hearing something.
Thank you all.
Thank you. This is great.